Okay, so I'm a public school parent. I have 3 kids. 2 are in high school in Lake Highlands, so I live in Dallas, but it's Richardson ISD. 60% of Richardson ISD is in Dallas. A lot of people don't know that. It's almost like an urban district within a suburban district. I ran for the Richardson ISD Board of Trustees a year ago, and I lost. I ran against an incumbent, a corporate education reformer. I got 5,000 votes, she got 6,000 votes, and that was that. In the end, it ended up being a blessing that I'm not on the board because I'm able to do a lot more outside of that. I have testified at the Senate, the House, Public School Finance Commission. I pay a lot of attention to what's happening at the legislative level and the local level. So are we now telling about what we want to?
Not yet, just
okay, yeah. So that's I'm happy to be here today. Let me just say that I do not profess to understand all of the intricacies of the African American struggle. I understand what has happened with the African American students, how they've been targeted by the reforms, and what's happening in the African American communities where they've been. It's been predatory ground for reformers to come in and take over property and the land there and targeting African American students.
Okay, Todd?
Hi, my name is Todd Williams. Thank you again for having me here. I am a Dallas ISD grad, graduated longer ago than I care to admit publicly. I have been involved intimately in education for the last 25 years. I served on a public school board. I served on a college board for 15 years. My wife, who is Hispanic, is very involved in this work as well. She runs a nonprofit focused on elementary schools in the Dallas ISD area. I have been involved in this work because it's pretty personal to me. I grew up in a house that had a lot of economic instability. We never owned our own home. Many times came home, lights weren't paid, the electric bill wasn't paid, lights didn't work, didn't have food insecurity, etc. And education, access to great public education and access to 100% financial aid allowed me to transform my life in terms of what I was able to do. And so it's personal to me to try and figure out how to, as best as I can in my small way, to try and help other students enjoy the benefits of public education as I was able to do. I am blessed to run an entity called the Commit Partnership. We're about 45 people who get up every day and think about how to look at the data and look at where kids are not succeeding and how can we alter public funding streams, local and state. How can we provide more resources to try and help kids where they need the help the most? And also, how can we work with policy actions to try and improve student outcomes as well. I was blessed, along with Senator West, to be asked to serve on the School Finance Commission. We've been meeting now for about 8 months down in Austin, about 70, 80 hours of testimony. It's been eye-opening in a lot of different ways, but I've learned about a lot of great things going on around the state that hopefully we can replicate in some form or fashion with significant additional funding at the state, because I think our public schools are underfunded. And I think that we absolutely have to provide more resources to kids with more challenges. And we are failing to do that as a state. Thank you.
Okay, David?
Thanks. Hi, my name is David King. I grew up in Dallas. I attended DISD school, graduated from DISD. I'm a father of children who all came through DISD. And, I guess my being here is due to a need that I developed to focus on our school at the policy level, at the funding level, because the direct impact on the ability, the facilitation of our children's education is directly linked to that. So, I began to pay attention. As simple as that, to focus on what was being done at the district level to direct funds, to direct focus in terms of programming. and how that translated to impact on our kids. My history coming up in Dallas schools is a mixed bag because I had the experience of being heavily impacted in a negative way by certain teachers, administrators I was exposed to. I experienced racism in the school system before I understood really what it was. And, so I had a direct understanding of how that influenced me, changed my perspective about myself, about society as a whole. At the same time, I had teachers who went above and beyond to try to reach me, to try to create a bridge and open my eyes to bigger and better things in life. And so I understand the amazing impact and influence that had as well. So my goal as a parent became, one, to ensure that my children got, more of the positive impact and, at minimum, less of the negative impact and influences that can come from people's perspectives that are infused into decision making. I think, for me at this point in time, my involvement, my continued involvement is based around a need to see a continued, well, I won't say continued, I need to see an establishment of a direction for African American students that creates for them, for our children, an environment that is filled with their own image in successful life. It's filled with their own history that shows them that they are a part of this tapestry called America, that they extend even far further beyond that, and that they have multiple images, individuals, elements of culture, etc., that they can embrace and hold on to give them a vision of themselves in a successful life. And success being defined by them, by our community, and not being defined for us. So that's the nature of my interest and involvement.
Thank you, David. Now if we can start with Todd. You are one of the major reforms that you've heard about or read about or researched that has had a positive impact on African American students in particular. Sure. But it may just be a positive impact on the district. We want to try to hone in on the African American aspect of it.
Sure. So one of the efforts that we've been personally involved in is an effort called the Dallas County Promise. We went to the state of Tennessee, where they had led the nation in the number of kids who were increasing and filling out their financial aid form and to access college. And studied that model and helped brought it back to Dallas and working in close partnership with the Community College Foundation of the CCCD, as well as UNT Dallas. Dallas and Texas overall is community college tuition is heavily subsidized by local and state taxes. So it's only about half of the average US Pell Grant. So said differently, if you're a low-income student in the state of Texas and in Dallas County, you've been able to go to 13th and 14th grade for a long time for free. But that expectation and that support was not really adequately provided by our system. So we launched the Dallas County Promise in partnership with those institutions that I mentioned earlier in the fall of last year, 2017. And this year, as of about a week ago, enrollment within Dallas County Community College is now up about 35% from the 31 Promise high schools that were initially part of the pilot. Almost all of those schools are in Dallas ISD, and obviously the large majority of them are here in southern Dallas. The great thing about the Promise is that students who sign the pledge and participate not only get to go to community college for free, tuition free, but also if they graduate the Promise in 13th and 14th grade, they are able to go to UNT Dallas also tuition free for their junior and senior year. So the whole effort is based on the fact that our college completion rates, whether it be a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, or a technical certificate in Dallas County, are not where they need to be by any stretch of the imagination, and particularly within our African American communities. And so how could we work to remove those financial barriers that often get in the way of kids completing some type of living wage credential, but also, more importantly, how could we provide the supports? So we have programs where we text parents, we text kids, we stay in touch with them. If for some reason they fall through the cracks, there's a way to reconnect them to other programs so that they might get some type of living wage credential and extricate themselves in terms of making sure that they've got a living wage.
Thank you. Just to remind our audience, if you have any questions, if you could jot them down for right now, then when we come back and open up question and answer, then we can be more specific about a particular program, especially this Dallas Promise initiative. Lynn, any other initiative that you want to talk about?
Well, I would say after the civil rights movement, you saw more Black leaders rise up, so they were able to get on the school boards and become state legislators, mayors. In Richardson ISD, we've had one Black trustee in the history of Richardson ISD. That one Black trustee is the only one who had my campaign sign in his yard, which is an interesting point. But he's suing Richardson ISD because he wants to see us become single-member districts versus an at-large district. So I would say what happened in Dallas ISD for the district to have single-member representation is powerful for cities and for school districts. If you look at what's happened to those areas where Black leaders have risen up through the elected, through locally elected positions, those are also the same areas that have been targeted for state takeover laws. So when Black leaders have advocated for their communities, they've been punished by I would say it's largely Republican at the top. It's largely Republican leaders and conservative leaders, and this has all evolved since the 70s, the 80s. You'll see legislation coming down, and so it's an interesting point. And I never would have even known. It would not have even occurred to me that was an issue if I hadn't read I read this book. It's called Takeover: Race, Education, and American Democracy. It put the pieces together for me because I was focusing so much on No Child Left Behind and what that had done to the unintended consequences of the accountability system, setting up schools for failure. But it wasn't until I saw this angle that this writer, Domingo Morel, had pointed out that there's a direct correlation between African American communities defending themselves, demanding more resources, equitable resources, because once they got into positions of power, they saw what was happening to their schools compared to their white counterparts. So.
Dave?
We talking about positive reform?
Either one.
Which side of the list I choose from, but I think that if I talk about a positive reform that I really like and I hope is advanced, it would be early learning. I think that's a crucial program that, in truth, I would like to see simply made universal. Regardless of income, regardless of background, so that every single child has the ability to enter into an educational format at those ages. The reason why I say that is because for our kids specifically, one of the main problems that we see is that they begin school already behind. When you're talking about the ability to recognize the alphabet, the number system, the ability to do those basic things that allows the teacher to then build upon that with their educational formats. It's extremely difficult for a teacher to do that if the children don't have those basic building blocks already in place. So for our children, I think that, you know, the more we are able to get them into those early learning programs, you know, age 3, age 4, et cetera, the better prepared they will be to hit the ground running. And you know, you won't be in a situation where you see so many children behind the curve and you have to see teachers saying, okay, well, I've got these 3 or 4 students that are ready to go, and then I've got this middle group that I need to, you know, teach them their numbers, teach them their letters, et cetera. So for me, that's a crucial thing. Now, I'll say that you know, it's always the way that it's implemented and the focus that it takes. So one issue with that, as I said, is making sure that it doesn't, you know, no matter what your background is, that you're able to attend. You know, wipe out all of the, you know, qualification issues and simply say, hey, you know, just like we have kindergarten and first grade, we've got pre-K, you know, 3 years old, you can get in there, period. You know, the other thing is what you teach them in that process, what you expose them to. My personal belief is that's an excellent time to expose them to other languages and cultures, because, you know, they'll absorb that just like they're absorbing the English language, for example. So it's an excellent time to begin to, you know, expose them to a wider perspective and viewpoint. That's something that will carry on with them, you know, throughout the rest of their lives. That's something I can attest to personally. You know, but that I think is the reform that I see is one of the most valuable things. You know, needs to grow and be improved and become more expansive. But it needs to, for my personal opinion, it needs to be just a common fixture in our education system.
Okay, thank you. Make one more round of initiatives or reforms, and then we'll open up for questions if you don't mind. And we'll start again with Todd.
I don't know that I would add anything different. I guess what I would say is I would echo the comment about early childhood. If you think about in our state, roughly about 4 in 10 children meet the state assessment in 3rd grade reading. And there's lots of data that would show that if you do not meet the state assessment in 3rd grade reading, you learn to read through 3rd grade, and thereafter you have to read to learn. For our African American students statewide, it's only 25%. I just think that's indefensible. I think by the age of 8, many children in our state, particularly children of color and particularly children from low-income backgrounds, have a tremendously uphill battle to fight. And so we, as part of the State Finance Commission, I was blessed to chair the Outcomes Working Group. And one of the things that we strongly recommended is that we provide additional funding so that if districts wanted to provide full-day pre-K to every one of their students, that they could. And I think that's incredibly important because it's just, in my opinion, it's just indefensible and tragic that so many of our children can't read by the age of 8, according to the state standard. And we are doing every single thing we can do to make sure that we change that outcome.
Okay, David?
Well, so with pre-K, I think there's one caveat that we need to consider. If we're going to offer pre-K for all students, we need to make sure that that pre-K is age appropriate and that it's not this data-driven culture. You know, the testing is moving down lower and lower grades, and these kids are under so much pressure. I think there are programs in place now that are really focusing on pre-K data, gathering data on these babies. Pre-K is supposed to be something very organic, something where you know, it's not about tests and this obsession with their letters and numbers and that pressure on the kids, they feel it. It starts to show up in their behavior at home when they're asked to do things that they're not ready to do. So if we're going to roll out pre-K across, I mean, if this is going to be universal, we need to protect those babies. You know, these 4 and 5-year-olds, it should not be about the STAR test and getting them ready for the STAR test. It should be getting them ready for very organic things in life, and that's my opinion.
Thanks, David. Any other initiatives you want to talk about?
Let me just say I agree with that. I personally, don't like to focus on testing even at the, at the later grades, because I think it's just it lends to, let me say, it takes away from a focus on real education or real inspiration. If I were to, I guess I, talked about a reform I really like to talk about one I don't care for. I understand the motive, but it would be the DEI. I don't like that payment structuring for teachers, because I think it leads to high turnover amongst teachers, number one. We lose our more experienced teachers, which is a critical loss. I mean, when I tell you as a parent, my wife and I track where our children go. We do it through our teachers. And that's how we do it, where we decide, okay, are they gonna be in the schools based upon the teachers that they're gonna have for that next year. And if we can't track a teacher that we know, because we know that they cannot afford to lose a year. They cannot afford to fall behind in any given year that they have, even a semester. And so the teacher that they have is absolutely critical. And when you have teachers turning over every 2 years, every 3 years, there's no way that you can make those assessments as a parent. There's no way you know whose hands you're putting your kids into. And that's just a dangerous zone that I refuse to accept. Another problem that I have with DEI is that I don't think that success can be afforded. I don't think that the budget is there to be able to, if your goal is to increase performance levels amongst all your teachers, which should be the goal. What else is there? But you can't afford to pay for that. If all your teachers do exactly as you want them to do and reach these higher bars, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And you're creating a situation where your teachers have nothing to look forward to over the long term. They can't account for a continued growth within this profession, within this environment, which is why I think the turnover is created. So I think that's an extremely problematic issue. We've already seen in previous years, I won't be that specific, but we've already seen a loss of so many of our career teachers for all the wrong reasons. And what we need to be doing is ensuring that we have a model in place that allows them continued growth and gives them a way to maintain their careers, so that they know they have a growth model to look forward to. Now, let's just say one other thing that I would mention that is a reform I hope to see grow extremely well. I was happy to hear that DISD has some focus on this, but it's the growth of culturally relevant and I'll say historically accurate curriculum and extracurricular activities within the school system. I think that's a crucial element that's being overlooked. When you're talking about, especially when we're talking about our students, we're talking about African American students. We know for certainty that throughout the education process, when you look at the history, it hasn't been just education, it's been miseducation. There have been incorrect facts, let's say those alternative facts, input into the education of our children. Doesn't just impact our kids, it impacts every child that is taught incorrectly. And it affects how we deal with each other in a multicultural society. And so the correction on that level to engage our children in a culturally relevant way, and that's going back to what I'm talking about, is showing them the positive images of themselves throughout their history, so that they can see all of the heights that they can obtain, that have been obtained by their home, by what they come from. That is a crucial foundation of inspiration for kids. And if you can inspire that child to seek to be this, this height of accomplishment, then you cannot stop them from learning. You can't stop them. There's nothing that you can do to block them from getting what they want out of this education system, okay? If you fail to do that, then there's nothing you can do to make them better. And that's where the creation of the gap really comes from, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. So I think that's a crucial element that we must focus on heavily. We must ensure is infused into our education systems without equivocation.
Amen. It sounds like all three of you have a likeness for early learning, pre-K. Some like the aspect of starting early, and others may say, let's make sure that this early start doesn't impede their maybe social growth, if you will. So let's talk a little bit more about early learning. Some of you have mentioned 4-year-olds. I think all of you mentioned 4-year-olds. Some have mentioned 3-year-olds. That's kind of going down a little bit younger than most people remember. I did not start school at 3 years old. So maybe some of our younger members did start at 3 years. So this is kind of new. Tell us about the benefits of having African American students in particular start school at the age of 3, knowing that some of them might still. Just tell us about it. What are your thoughts about starting school at the age of 3? Todd?
I would be in favor of it. I think it's a parental option, obviously. It shouldn't be forced. You don't legally have to go to school in this state until first grade. I think 97, 98% of kindergartners attend kindergarten because they believe in its effectiveness. There's a lot of brain science and research out there that says that 90% of a child's brain develops by the age of 5. And yet only about 5% of our public spending is in that 0 to 5 space. And so I just think it's critically important that if a parent wants to put their child in pre-K as a 3-year-old, half day, I believe Dallas ISD is now doing full day pre-K for 3-year-olds at some locations. I think at the new center in the medical district, I think. One. And I think they'll see what it shows and they'll decide. But I think also, you can probably appreciate having access to quality early child care is also, in many cases, necessary for parents to want to work. And so we have a lot of people who would like to work in this community who cannot because they can't figure out the child care situation. And child care is very expensive for families. It could be upwards of $8,000, $9,000 a year. And that can be extraordinarily expensive. So to the extent that we can provide that as a public good, we're also allowing more income in the family, more people to work, but also I think addressing what brain science shows is that children have synapses continually in their brain, and if they're not being stimulated, that they wither. And so I think it's important to have that option.
Okay. Anyone else? And I hope someone will touch on the idea of all day for 3-year-olds. We talked about one school in Dallas that's going to have it all day, but what about the idea of all day for 3-year-olds?
Well, I'll say that I want to echo that sentiment in terms of the real benefit that it can be for parents who need to work. I've experienced that personally in terms of the difficulty of putting children in daycare and dealing with being able to work and manage all of that as well, the costs, et cetera. I think that there needs to be a stronger focus on really putting teachers in that space that are truly trained to focus on that age group. It's not just a babysitting situation. It's real. There needs to be really education involved. Now, in terms of the full day, I'm in favor. I have dealt with both situations where you had half day pre-K and you had full day pre-K, and half day pre-K. We were like, never again. Why waste your time? Because as soon as you're dropping them off, you're picking them up. And what are they being exposed to in that short time frame? It's just not conducive to the accomplishments that you would focus on for that group. So I'm definitely in favor of full day. For the duality of reason. A parent that is trying to work cannot leave at lunchtime and then, you know, go home with their child. Or, you know, have to leave and pick them up from school and then take them to a daycare and get back to work. It's not feasible from that perspective. At the same time, from an instructional perspective, there's just not enough that's going to be fitted to that time. You know, you're going to have a lot of kids who get there, take a nap, and then you're picking them up and taking them home. So they need to be there full day so that they have the opportunity to be exposed to education that's going to fire those synapses, just as Mr. Williams said.
Lynn, any thoughts on that?
I don't know that I have too much to add. I know that there was a Dallas Morning News article that said rich kids, their kids are in pre-K, poor kids, their kids are with grandma. And I thought, well, okay, so grandma, is that a bad thing? If you think about what grandma's who's going to love that child, the grandma, the mom, whoever is closest to the child. If we're putting the children in a situation where it's not going to be a nurturing environment, grandma is a better option or a family member. But I know that kids, the parent, I work with unemployed people. For the last 8 years, that's what I do. Every Tuesday morning, I work with unemployed women. I see the struggles that they have with childcare. Sometimes their job pays them less than what the childcare costs. I don't profess to have a solution to that. But if we are going to provide 3-year-olds pre-K in the public schools, what does that look like? We can't even get the K through 12 on grade level. 52% of our kids in Richardson ISD cannot read on grade level in 5th grade. So if we get them in pre-K, is that going to change that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So those are just some things to consider. It's a complicated, it's a very complex issue, and I know childcare is astronomical.
Okay. David touched on merit pay, and some, at least in Dallas, I see a lot about merit pay. And now we're starting to hear from the TA and maybe from the governor about merit pay, whereby the higher performing teachers get a higher pay. Anyone have any thoughts on merit pay? They wants to jump in quick.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this was maybe a month ago. A study came out by RAND, and it exposed the Gates Foundation. They spent $575 million on, they're just dying to tie the teachers' pay to test scores. They've been trying to do this for more than a decade. It doesn't work because it's an invalid accountability system that they're basing the teachers' pay on. So what it does, at least what I've seen with the TEI in Dallas, which it stands for Teacher Excellence Initiative, is that it rewards those in magnet schools and those who are teaching higher socioeconomic levels. It doesn't work. So, you know, I would love to be able to give teachers an incentive. Teachers shouldn't have this ceiling on their income potential. It should be, we should reward our teachers, but the model that's being pushed around the state, you've got the governor, you've got the commissioner, Todd Williams is a big fan of this. And all the legislators seem to be getting behind this, but no one's looking at the unintended consequences of tying teachers to test scores. It will not work. We can try it again, and it's not going to work. And we're going to spend millions of dollars on it. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little. I prayed that I wouldn't lose my
Okay,
phone.
you're on your soapbox. So, I want to stick with this idea for a little bit. We talked about tying to test scores. So what if the merit pay was based on the teacher for that year, for the students that she has that year, and the growth that they make that year?
Okay, so I work with the League of Women Voters. I'm on the education committee.
Okay.
Every Tuesday after I leave the job ministry, I go to South Dallas. I go to Pastor Anthony Nolan's church, and we sit there and we dig into this stuff. I am not a data-driven expert by any means. But we're trying to come up with a solution that is possibly t-test based rather than, which t-test is what they have now. Yes, and come up with, instead of, because I know politically I can't say, okay, you got to just throw out the system. They're not going to do that. So we have to work within the framework that we have. And so coming up with a better version of TEI, I'd be willing to work with Todd and his group on that, but I still think it's a foundation based on quicksand. So I don't know.
And I'll say mostly what I hear about TI is based on pay, and not the actual evaluation of the teacher, as an instructor.
When students can evaluate the teacher too. I'm pretty sure that I would have given all my teachers a bad evaluation because I'm a rebellious teen. I would have. They retaliate and they do that.
Todd, any thoughts on it?
I have a couple. Today, a first-year teacher is a pretty attractive salary for someone coming out of college. It's $52,000 a year. Under seniority-based pay, next year, regardless of how great a teacher you are or how much professional development you might need to continue to get better, you're probably going to make $400 more. And the next year, you're going to make $400 more, and the next year, you're going to make $400 more. And so there have been lots of national studies that have talked about education as a profession and how people think about it and their attraction to it. Unfortunately, the number of teachers who are coming out of schools of education has been declining 7 straight years. It's down 15%. And most of that gap is now being filled by alternative certification providers. And if you are alternative certified, it does not mean that you can't be an amazing teacher. You can be. But there are lots of surveys that we do with our teaching force that we basically say, how do you feel about how well prepared you are? And when you have 5 weeks of online learning, you don't actually have to practice teaching in the classroom for more than 15 hours. You take a certification test as many times as you need to take it, and then you're certified. That's not the best preparation to put for teachers in front of our classroom. I think they need year-long residency periods. I think they need to be supported. I know that if I went and tried to teach today, I'm sure I would fail because it is a very, very hard job. And we need to treat it like a very hard job in a prestigious profession. And so I think trying to figure out through multiple measures. I think great teachers know who the other great teachers are in a building, and I think they should be part of the process to help determine who is effective. I think our best and highest paid teachers, part of their job should be to coach new teachers. So maybe they teach 4 classes and they coach 2 or 3. I think we need to be very intentional about mentoring teachers and providing support, but ultimately, the incentives in education today is that if you want to be able to provide for your family in a meaningful way, you need to go into administration. You cannot stay in the classroom because you will wait forever to get any sort of meaningful increase in pay. And I just think that's the wrong set of incentives if we really want to put the best teachers in front of our kids who need them the most.
Thank you. David, any comments, thoughts?
Well, I'll say to your question, I do think that would be an improvement to focus on, okay, the starting point for a teacher in their classroom and the end point versus a more competitive system, say, which teacher did the best overall, and you got winners and losers. Even with that though, one of the main concerns that I have is the process of assessment within the system. I think there are inherent flaws there. I do think that focus on test scores as heavily as it's focused on, it just leads to missing so many important things about the education process, which so much of it is intangible, honestly. The ultimate reality is that you cannot quantify a child on a spreadsheet. You just can't do it. You can't run the numbers on a kid, on a human being. And for that reason, you simply cannot create an equation that creates the perfect teacher. You just can't do it. It's a fluid situation. It's relative to the specific kids that are being dealt with. There are a huge amount of variables. The same circumstance impacts each different child in a different way. So it's a hugely multifaceted, so it just lends itself to inherent flaws in that focus when you're saying, okay, we're gonna judge by the test whether you did better or not. And that's the process of our assessment. You begin with this test score, you end with that test score, et cetera. I think that this is something that, now I say, nothing is perfect in this world. So to say, is it a model that cannot be made better, cannot be improved? Of course it can be. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that we should go to determine how that should work? Well, it's really a holistic, universal reality. So there's a difficulty in even approaching all of the people that need to weigh in, and how do you allow them to weigh in? And when you factor that with, shall we say, other interests that undergird this kind of movement, everything's tied to a return on investment, unfortunately, in society. And this is one area where I feel very strongly that that's always going to demean the practice and the profession. This is just, you say, we need to look at the teaching profession as one of the, look at it, with the highest regard. What could be more important when you think about it? What could possibly be more important than this? So, yes, it can be made better. I don't see a way, and as I say, it's just maybe my short-sightedness. I don't see a way to truly make it work, but at minimum, if you were to focus on where a teacher begins and use multiple variables to determine that in terms of where students are, and what resources she has or he has versus others, because that's a big issue, and where they end up, then I think that at least is an improvement.
Okay, thank you. So, I've been watching the body language, and I feel some energy over here. I feel a little bit of energy back there, and I feel some energy over here, like you guys just jumping at the bit. And I saw somebody on the edge of the seats over here first, so let me just start in this corner. Anybody have a question or comment? You change your mind.
No.
Okay,
Well, I just have a question about
let me
the,
play Oprah, hold on.
You're gonna have a gift under the seat.
my question would be about the early childhood learning and putting, 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds in school. I just know that the majority of us here, we weren't in school at 3, and as Lynn said, I really do believe it should be organic. I mean, I think even in kindergarten, I was finger painting, I was playing with dolls, I was playing house. And I think part of the problem is this push to have children learning to read in kindergarten. It's just not really age appropriate. And so I'm just wondering what you all think about that. I just don't like the idea of the government saying, hey, now we want your child at 3 and we want them all day. Who wants to give their child to the government at 3? We have no idea what they're even putting in their heads, and we know that our 3-year-old can't learn to read and write, that they really just need to be playing. And as Lynn said, probably be with mom and grandma or aunt or whoever, neighbor, someone who's gonna really love on them. So I'm just wondering if early childhood is the answer, or is it maybe going back to what we were all taught, which is, start kindergarten, you learn to play, you slowly are introduced to numbers and the alphabet, and we go back to phonics, we go back to math facts, we remove computers from the classroom, and we just go back to traditional education. I mean, I don't know, do you think that would maybe be a solution, or do we really need to give our kids to the government all day?
Okay.
That's my point.
So when we give our kids to the government, what should we teach them? What should they be learning? Is it just teaching how to read, or is there something else we should be teaching them that they might not get at grandma's house? Anyone other?
I'll say, if we're putting 3-year-olds and asking them to fill out spreadsheets or fill in the dots, we have failed miserably. I think 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds should be learning to paint and converse and play with social skills with other students and all that. But I think the key thing is it is optional. Here's the thing I'll be very candid about. The thing I struggle about is I have to deal with legislators when I have conversations with them on the far right who are very anti-tax, who basically, frankly, make the same argument. But I think that they're making the argument not because of what you mentioned. I think they're making the argument because they don't want to spend the money on kids that don't look like them. I'm just being really honest with you. And so I just think that at the end of the day, we need to provide options to our families. And if they need full-day pre-K because of work or because they think that the professionals in that classroom have been well-trained and what an age-appropriate professional development at the age of 3 and 4 years old, then we should provide that option. It's not required, it's not mandatory, but I think there's excellent pre-K programs at age 3 and age 4 in both the public sector and the private sector, and that's what we should be providing because, again, if 90% of the brain is developing by the age of 5, we need to be working with kids and making sure that they're not sitting on a couch in front of a TV.
Okay, you guys,
Sir? I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
I'm sorry?
Can I comment? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll head to the other side over here.
Okay, that's
I'm gonna try to go back and forth.
And why, can I say one thing about that particular?
Okay, we're gonna have a conversation about early learning.
You know what? It's very important. I heard what you said, and that's good. That's your opinion. But your formative years are your early years.
Yes, they are.
And it depends on where you put your baby. Look at the curriculum.
Thank you.
Make sure they're doing more than just playing. Play is learning. It's according to what kind of play it is.
That's right. Play is
Okay, I'm a 33-year retiree. Can't you tell?
You sound like a teacher.
Play is learning.
Okay,
She heard hers first. She really did. I saw her first.
okay. I hope I'm not losing control, but that's it.
Okay, thank you. My name is Avis Hardiman, and I'm a senior here at Paul Quinn College. But before I came back to Paul Quinn College, I was like a daycare worker at the VA hospital. And my responsibility was to teach the infants and the toddlers. And I'm here to tell you that they learn as infants.
Yes.
They learn as infants and toddlers. And what they learn is how it's more social because they learn. And I went to Brookhaven to get my CBA because the VA was requiring more than just a babysitting service. But I came to Paul Quinn as an early education student, but I changed my degree because I felt like there was a greater need than for me to just be my goal to be in the classroom. But I just want to say that infants and toddlers, they do learn. And they're there all day. And when you are a highly qualified daycare worker, teacher, you learn those skills that get them ready to go to the next level.
Okay. So what we have to have is purposeful play. Purposeful play, yes ma'am.
I'm actually.
No, I'm gonna hold the mic.
Okay.
No, if I give it a mic.
So I actually have a question. My name is Ashley Washington. I'm actually a Paul Quinn student here. I'm a senior. One of my questions are, what steps can you as an individual and we as a social take to make sure that all our young people have access to quality education?
Any thoughts?
You saying, so that all of our kids have access to quality education?
Yes.
Well, I think, one thing is, to be able to create the program. You're talking about at the younger levels?
From younger level and on up.
Okay. One thing I would say about that, kind of relate to the point that was just made. Personally, I'm a believer in the reality that, we generally tend to set our standards too low for our children. And that generally children will rise to whatever standard that is set for them. So we raise our expectations of them, not in a restrictive way or required way, but if we simply raise the standards and expose them accordingly, they're going to rise to those levels, and you'll see results that we didn't think possible. So one thing I would say is, one crucial aspect of that is making the early learning universal. I do agree it should be by choice. Some grandmothers will want to take care of their kids, some won't.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Some will have a bone to pick pick with you about leaving your kids. And then there's some grandparents who are raising those kids themselves, and they still need to go to work. So it's a very reality. So it needs to be by choice, but allowing that access at those ages and focusing on or universally. It's not all about reading, writing, arithmetic. Education is to the whole person.
Can I add something to it? I think there are just 4 fundamental strategies. Make sure that every child has a quality early childhood education and knows how to read by 3rd grade. Make sure that we do everything we can to place the most effective, well-prepared educator that looks like their students in front of them. 3rd, make sure that they understand that some education beyond high school is not only expected of them, but that we do everything we can to make sure it's affordable, accessible, and we support them in that process. We should not have one counselor for 500 kids helping them figure out where they go to college.
That's right.
And then the 4th thing I would say is make sure we deliver resources where they're needed the most.
Right.
Kids should not go to school hungry. They should not go to school hungry. If they need resources, and that means enrichment. That means extracurricular activities, band, athletics, supporting them. It's not just about 8 to 3.
Well, here are a couple of questions that I think parents can ask to really understand, are their kids learning? So you ask, what are they being taught? How are they being taught? And who's profiting or who's benefiting off of the professional development that the teachers are evaluated on, and who's profiting off the curriculum? Those are really important questions. And if you look at the TEA commissioner and the commissioners of past, they've been given far too much power. The State Board of Education has been hamstrung. They don't even have the power to help us fix the curriculum. Our curriculum has been hijacked. If you look at how your kids are learning math, how they're learning to read, how did you learn to read, Joyce? Phonics?
Yes.
That's why you're so smart, right? And that's how I learned to read. We have to really, reformers always talk about data and all these initiatives, but they never really want to talk about the curriculum because it's been squeezed out because of the standardized testing. It's all about the test.
I will say the Schoolhouse Rock has taught me a whole lot.
That's right.
The bill on Capitol Hill.
Let me get it first.
Okay. In terms of early education, I did go to preschool at 3. My mom put me there, but not to teach me to read because she'd already taught me to read. So I think people live up or down to your expectations. When you expect too little, they perform accordingly. So the earlier you start, the better. I think the parents have a role. They may or may not fulfill that role, but before you even get to the education system, the parents should have been teaching something. But that early pre-K, it's really helpful, one, for the enrichment that it offers, but also to get the child used to being away from home. That was my mom's main purpose. She wanted, when we went to kindergarten for the first day, she didn't want that to be anything unusual for us to go away from home all day. And it wasn't because of what she did. I was like, why would people be nervous? Why would kids be nervous about leaving home? Because I've been doing it for 2 years.
Okay. Getting students acclimated to being in a school environment and learning environment away from home. I need to come this lady green because she's gonna do something about that.
Not all parents are good parents and not all teachers are good teachers. And I do agree that we should start at age 3, but not teaching the kids to learn to read, but social ability, knowing the integrity of what's right and wrong. And once we get in, we get the teachers, a good teacher that is trained to show that this 3-year-old, this is what we need to do, and this is what we need to accomplish while you're in the class with me. They take that home because every child, we're here for our kids. My kids are grown, but I'm here for the education of my grandkids. But there's a lot more parents out there that will not come in here and say, this is what my child needs. And so as educators, as people of the board, there needs to be some kind of in between where not only do we have bad teachers, not only do we have bad parents, but how can we get get those kids to understand everything is not bad because you in a bad environment.
So it sounds like what she's saying is that whenever we're teaching the child at the school, make sure that the parent knows how to teach the child at home. Kind of compliment, I think that's what she's trying to say. Parents need to learn how to teach and how to take care of their kids.
Give that mic to trustee Nuttall.
I give her a mic.
As a DISD parent of a graduate and one in the currently in the district, on the TEI, what we never talk about is Todd, as you stated, that students are not ready on the third grade to reading on third grade, but yet we have a TEI survey that a teacher is surveyed by a third grader. And it's only in high school, and that score goes to help them go down, and then they don't get their pay raise. So what suggestion do you have for TEI? Because at my daughter's school, she's lost several teachers during the school year because of the lack of pay. And then even with the TRE, we're saying that we want to raise our taxes because we want to give teachers more money, but it's based on the TEI. They still have 35% of their score is based on the test. The rest of 15% is based on the student survey, and the other is still subjective. So they're still not getting a pay raise and paying them accordingly. So what do you suggest that we change on the TEI so we are helping students academically? And then that's the question on that. Secondly, I do understand what you say, the government with our children. What we're not addressing is, we get out of school at 3 o'clock. Most parents, you keep talking about working parents to put their children in public school. They get off of work at 5. And then they have to at 6 o'clock. So we're not addressing after school programming for our kids. And then when she talks about the government, we have to look at the curriculum that we're teaching our children. I'm disappointed with part of the curriculum that's going on now with DISD with my own child. We have to look at the curriculum and make sure we have good curriculum. And you didn't address, Lynn, that it's the tech school board that decide the curriculum that is taught to our children. So, that's okay.
Any comments
There are
from either one
parents
of
who
you?
we've had a Stanford mathematician go before the State Board of Education and prove that the changes in the math curriculum are harming children. That if the kids are in this math for more than 3 years, they cannot recover because they've already passed the point of where their brain should be learning those basic foundational things in math. Instead, they're trying to learn 6 different ways to solve an equation, and it's confusing the kids. It's supposed to develop critical thinking. It's not. But they can fix that. They're not going to fix it because I can assure you what's going to happen is they're going to bring in a digital program, and the kids will be on a device. They've already got contracts. Dallas ISD is a pilot for Reasoning Mind, and they are going to put these children on a device with a bot or an artificial intelligence who will be teaching your child, and then they'll collect the data on that. When they show that the kids have improved, investors come in and they will get a return on the investment, and our children are investment vehicles for profit. This all started in Dallas. Everything that you see going on in the country, it starts in Dallas.
Okay then.
Amen.
Lou, I know, that's what I'm trying to.
That's killing
Todd. Okay, Todd.
So Bernadette, if it was up to me, and it's not, but if it was up to me, I think I would include more teacher peer review as part of that evaluation, because I do think the best teachers know who the other teachers are. I would try and figure out a way so that part of your compensation was tied to how the overall school was doing. I think trying to pit teacher against teacher is probably not the best way, but if it's a collaborative environment, we want to encourage collaboration in that work. If we're going to have assessments as part of the evaluation, I would be in favor of multiple assessments versus just one test that's very high stakes. I frankly wish the DISD board would pass a policy, if they could, that says you can't do more than one benchmark test per star, and that's it.
My question is, what are your thoughts about technical and vocational training? How can we incorporate these opportunities in our schools more cohesively to ensure that, once these students graduate high school, there are guaranteed jobs for them. Jobs, if they decide to go to college, 9 times out of 10 will pay for it because it's a private corporation that's willing to invest in its employees, and they can go to college for free at that point. So that's my question. How do we incorporate technical and vocational training to ensure students who don't go to college also have opportunities opportunities that can be lucrative.
Either one of you want to respond to that?
Well, go ahead.
So DIST, I think Ms. Foreman, we have 23 P-Tech academies at each of the high schools. I think part of the promise effort, what we've done is we've gone with information back to the counselors at each of the high schools and showed them these are the top 25 jobs in the region that have something like 34 to 40,000 unfilled positions today. Here's what they pay. Here's the pathway that you can, maybe 6 months of training, maybe 12 months of training, et cetera. And so we're trying to give more information to the counselors because a lot of times, one, they're overstaffed and underpaid, which is 1 to 500 kids. And secondly, they've been historically trained about this is how I get kids into college. And there hasn't been this feedback loop to make sure they understand all these jobs that pay $50, $60, $70, $80,000 that may only require 6 months or 12 months of training. And so the community college is a huge player in this space. It's very helpful. But I think we've got, you're right, we have, in the country, they said yesterday, we have 2 million unfilled STEM jobs in this country. They're asking for people that we're not training and we're not making kids aware of it.
And many of our community colleges, we have courses for aviation, mechanics, air conditioning, things of that nature. Could fill the gap for some of our students when they leave high school. Lynn, you have a comment on that?
Just, I appreciate your comments from the audience there. What I'm seeing is there's this focus that my district is doing where they're looking to industry and asking them, what do you need, what do you need? And from my perspective as a career coach for job seekers, of course there are technical skills needed, but the foundation is really lacking in communication skills and being able to write and read well and do math. I mean, just basic things. We're skipping over that because we're focusing on what industry wants, and industry is creeping younger and younger. And my 8th grader had to determine what his major was. He's in 9th grade now, but they have to decide what career track they're going. We have to be careful that we're not slotting workers for the workforce, that we're actually giving kids the foundational knowledge. Then they can when they're in the older grades, then they can figure out, okay, I'm interested in this direction, and raising the ceiling, giving kids an opportunity to see what are the careers out there. And at least we're doing that in my district, but I think we're skipping over some of the important basics.
Okay. We're really at our time limit. I promise these two people the last 2 questions are comments.
So my question is, I grew up, when I started school, my parents taught me, I knew how to write my name, I knew how to spell my name, my address, my phone number when I went to school. But a lot of kids didn't. So I'm asking, what kind of programs we put in schools to teach children like entrepreneurship, to work for themselves, and and like what she said, more on the technical side instead of, it seems like we're building these kids to go into the workforce and then going to the workforce, take standardized tests, and they lose the ability to read. See, I took the TOS test in the text. I was in school when they changed. Not the STAR test, so.
Right.
But I knew how to count and read, so my teacher didn't have to teach me how to pass the test. I knew how to read. I knew how to read, I knew how to critically think. And now I have twin daughters, they're 5 years old, and they know how to critically think because of their father, but the school doesn't teach them that.
Yeah, let me say, I agree with that comment. One of the concerns that I've had as I've watched the change in curriculum over time. When we were kids, we used to have when we were in high school, we used to have to write a research paper.
Exactly.
We used to have to get out there and study and research and find information and formulate an opinion, take a position. A lot of the kids that I see, even those that are top higher levels of math and science and whatnot, can't write an essay when they graduate high school, an essential function. So I do think that there is, I understand the importance of involving employers in the educational process because we want our kids to have a pathway to opportunities for economic gain. However, the problem that I have with it is that schools should not just be workforce training.
Right.
School is, education is about opening the eyes and freeing the mind.